I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So when we were listening to Dane talk about him and perusing Dane's draft guide here about Jawan Taylor, talks about his athleticism, his competitive finish. He's got a lot of promise as a pass protector, but the first sense is he is not a technically sound blocker right now. Mm-hmm. You are, and I would say, probably the greatest technician to ever play left tackle
Prided
in the
myself
NFL.
in my technique.
You did, and you would say I was never the strongest, I was never the fastest, but I was able to use your body's mechanics soundly to create strength. And would you be concerned? Is that something that can be taught to a naturally gifted athlete, or is that something that has to be something you've kind of ingrained in your body all of these years?
It's like we talked about the show before it went on air, because that's a great setup question, because what I'll say is a couple things.
Nailed it.
I would not be concerned as an evaluator looking at a guy that had poor technique, because I would hope that I've put some really good offensive line coaches in those meeting rooms downstairs that can teach technique on the field and in the meeting room. However, you need to be able to absorb that technique, so you need to be smart enough, and you need to be able to have a body that is mobile enough. Your hip joints, your knees, your ankles, you need to be able to bend to be able to get into those positions to properly execute the technique. So if I'm looking at a player that has bad technique, but I talk to him, he's smart, he's able to retain information, he's able to understand simple concepts when I'm talking to him about biomechanics, and when I watch him move, he's an athlete. He can bend, he can get down, his ankles can flex inside and outside, forward and backwards. He can bend his hips. His hip socket can move in all directions. He's not fused where all he can move is forward and back. Those are the things you need to be able to do as an offensive lineman to bend and get in those positions to create that power. So if you watch him and he's a real stiff guy, then I'm going to say even if he understands the technique and the coaching, he'll never be able to use proper technique because he can't bend the way he needs to. With all that being said, those first two guys that I mentioned, Cody Ford and Jawan Taylor, they can bend and they can get the technique. And so you would say, Jawan Taylor, I don't mind that he doesn't have the technique right now because I can teach him and he's a guy that can learn it.
So when you speak of teaching technique and guys that can learn it, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking there are techniques in a golf swing. There's a technique to shooting a basketball. Obviously, people will shoot it in different ways, but you take Markelle Fultz, great athlete, but for whatever reason, not able to master that technique. Is it for you more about just the way that their body is able to move? And if you know the body can move
a lot
the
of
right
it's
way,
genetics.
You can get in there.
Yeah, a lot of it's just
but,
genetics.
Right, but genetics can't necessarily be taught.
Right, exactly right. A lot of people are just stiff in the hips. Like, you know, I've played with a lot of guys that are just stiff, and that's just the way God made them. You know, Alex Mack was very mobile, very flexible. That's just the way he was. You're able to improve it a little bit. You can get worse at it, but it's hard to make drastic improvements with stiffness and mobility. But, like, when you're talking offensive line technique, you're talking about hundreds of techniques that you have to learn to be an efficient offensive lineman. When you're talking about a golf swing, all right, you got your driver, you got your irons, you got your pitcher, your putter, maybe your sandwich. There's a handful of techniques to learn, so it's not as difficult now to be great, to be Tiger Woods.
A lot of golfers that argue
it's
with
different,
you.
but the swing is pretty consistent, pretty similar, and there's a few techniques that are different to learn, but as an offensive lineman, there's so many to learn. That's why it takes a lot of time.
Is that, though, why you would be willing, given the natural gifts and the biomechanics of a guy like Desmond Harrison, to give him time? Because if he's got things that can't be taught, so if he can get the things that can, he could be dominant.
It's like drafting a fast guy. They always say you can't teach speed. Like you're kind of given the small range of speed that you can improve a little bit, or you can decrease speed a little bit if you're not training the right way, but you're not going to go from a 4.8 guy to a 4.4 guy.
Right.
It's just DNA. It's just who you are. And so everybody likes to draft the fast guys because that's one of the things you can't teach. And so a guy like Desmond, who's a great athlete, who's very mobile, who's very bendy, flexible, that's hard to teach. And so you draft a guy knowing if I give him the time and the good coaching, he can learn the technique.
That was incredible. You worked with both Desmond and Greg a lot this year. What did you see from those guys as the year went along? And I know you were working with both of them on tips and little things, and Greg had communication with you quite a bit.
Yeah. The thing that helped Greg more than anything, because he was always a good athlete. He always loved football. He always was pretty good technically, but he just needed the confidence to be able to do it consistently. And I think when he came here working with Bob Wiley and some of the other offensive linemen in that room gave him the confidence to be able to go out and put some good film together. And then it's a snowball effect as an offensive lineman. You have one good game, Baker Mayfield pats you on the back and says, "You're my guy." All of a sudden, he's got this big glow to him the next day. He comes in the building. You have a good practice. And all of a sudden, you start thinking of yourself in a different way. And you're thinking, wow, I can do this. I can be an offensive lineman. Now I know why I was drafted where I was. Right. And then it just snowballs. And then you see all of a sudden he puts together a really good season. And then they reward him with a nice new contract. And that just continues to build his confidence. So for Greg, I see that arrow going up even more than it already has. And that's a great thing for the Browns, having a guy like that as a left tackle.
Yeah, it was amazing. I'm sure for people out there listening, wait a second, the guy who's picked second overall didn't have confidence. We had that great interview with him where he felt like he didn't know if he could play football. He was so open about it.
Well, you hear about it all the time. I think Kevin Love just came out about all the things, maybe this was a year ago, but about all the mental issues that he had. And a lot of that's built around confidence, because the guys that are the perfectionists are often the ones that have mentally the most difficult time accepting the fact that they're good enough to be here. And me personally, actually was something, I wouldn't say I had to deal with it, but it was part of who I was early on in my career. And it helped drive me and motivate me, because I never felt like I belonged and I never felt like I was good enough. And so it drives you for that perfection. And even when you would have a perfect game, in the back of your mind, you were saying, I'm just fooling people. I just got lucky. You know, I had that great game, and it wasn't really who I was, and I'm going to be exposed at any moment. And it takes such a long time to get out of that mindset. Now, early on, it drives you, it motivates you, right, to be perfect on every play. And I think that's part of a lot of the great offensive linemen that I've talked to. They have that inside of them. But for Greg, it almost went too far.
Right.
Where it actually does. It is detrimental. You want it so bad that you just lose so much confidence that you start performing poorly. And as an offensive lineman, it's not how many good things you do, as we know. It's how many bad things you do. That's what gets you run out of the league.
You know, it's amazing sitting here with a guy that's going to go to Canton and was the best at his position, and you say you had – those insecurities drove you and that you were fooling people. I remember watching the movie Comedian, which is a documentary about Jerry Seinfeld and stand-up comics. And Jerry Seinfeld, who at this point had already done Seinfeld, was really as big as you could be, completely insecure. Thought his sets were terrible and needed, validation from like, was that okay? And I was like, you're Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah. Right.
So it is amazing. And there must be something to that it does drive people who are never satisfied with their performance, right? Because you want to continue to get better. But if you take it to the point where you start believing that you aren't good, like truly believing, then that's going to be a problem. Because when you're thinking out there, Desmond Harrison told me, he said, I realized, A, I need to work on the bull rush, but B, I was out there thinking about the things that I didn't need to be thinking about and not thinking about the things that I did need to be thinking out. And then it just became a cycle where I didn't know what I was supposed to be thinking about, and you can't play football that way.
For me, and this is something that I've shared with Desmond and Greg and all the offensive linemen that I've worked with, is every time I walked to the line of scrimmage, I had a small box in my head of the things that I was thinking about on that play, and that's how I would prepare. And it was usually 3 or 4 things depending on what the play was. It was usually technique, assignment, and then what can the defense do to me? And those were the things I was looking for. And so whatever those triggers were, let's say the play was like a zone play to the left, I walked to the line of scrimmage, I was thinking, okay, snap count, assignment, alignment, what's my technique, and then what's the defense going to try to do to me, and what's the worst case scenario? And that was my box. And so if, the defensive lineman got tight, I know he was going to cross my face, so I needed to be aware to call Joel off of his double team with the center, double team with me, because if my defensive end played to the inside, I needed Joel there to take over the block so then I could go up to the linebacker. And that was a trigger from where the safety was lined up on that play. And each week is different based on the defense, but I had to have that checklist in my head walking to the line of scrimmage, and that was the only thing I was going to think about. Everything outside of that box was completely persona non grata. It did not exist in my brain, because all that is white noise, and it's a distraction from trying to focus on your job. And so that's why when I would tell people that oftentimes I didn't even know what the score was, because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know if we were winning. I didn't want to know if we were losing. All I needed to know was the situation and then what the play was and how I had to be ready, because outside of that, it was only distracting me from my single-minded focus. And that's a lot of the issue that Desmond was having was, what do I focus on? I don't even know what to focus on. I know I need to know my play, but I need to focus on the things that are going to affect me and what is going to change instantaneously throughout this play that I need to be able to adjust on the run.
So would you say, in addition, you've talked about body mechanics, flexibility, all of those things, but it sounds to me what you just went through very quickly was about 10 calculations that you made as you approached the huddle, and then a few more immediately after the snap was going, involving not only yourself communicating with the person next to you. So it sounds like one of the most important things we always talk about for a quarterback is, can he process information quickly? It sounds to me like you're saying that's also a big deal for the offensive line.
Yeah, and processing information quickly is not just about how smart you are. It's about understanding the process of learning what are the important things to be ready for, to know on each play. Because if you're looking for everything, you're not going to be ready for anything, right? You need to have that checklist on each play that you walk up to the line of scrimmage, and you need to be thinking about it before it happens, because if whatever the blitz is or the slant or the defense that changes on the run, if you're thinking about it and you're surprised by it after it happens, it's already too late. You need to be prepared, and in your mind, it's already happened. And so when the defense does that thing, you're ready for it, and you're able to adjust like you expected it to happen.
Okay, how many people actually have the mindset that you have, that you just laid out to us, and are able to not maybe implement it, but how many people even have that mindset?
How many left tackles are in the Hall of Fame? I mean, there are,
no, not many. But what we had a conversation last night that I thought was so interesting about, to be a successful NFL player. We were talking about a couple guys drafted by the Browns who didn't have this mindset. It's a lifestyle, and what you described to me right there is somebody who is studying so much that you're going to know based on when you play Team X where their defensive end lines up versus where their safeties lined up. That's telling you something. So, how many people do you think truly in the league get that and have that lifestyle? What percentage would you say?
I would say most of the good ones have it to some degree. Now, I was neurotic, and I took it to the next level because I wanted to be perfect. And that goes back to what we were saying before. The insecurities that I had manifested themselves in my need to be perfect, because if I had one bad play in a game, it would eat me alive. And so I prepared to be perfect, because if I missed one thing because I had overlooked what some defensive tackle does when he has a tendency to line up with his other hand on the ground, I would beat myself up. That night, I wouldn't sleep. Monday, I couldn't watch the film because it just bothered me so much, and I had this feeling like I let my team down. Even if it had no impact on anything, you just get into that mindset because you live in that box. I should have seen it. I can't believe I screwed my team like that.
That's why he uses the sous vide.
That's right.
That's perfect. Perfect.
That's why I love the sous vide.
It all makes sense.
It's full circle.
You guys seen that?
Now I'm sweating.
Now you're definitely sweating.
You're sweating.
You've seen there's that paid subscription thing called Masterclass when it's like famous chefs and people tell you to do that. That was a master class, not just in playing left tackle and professional football.